the death of the actor Leonard Nimoy. Died at the age of 83 from a pulmonary disease. For many, Nimoy will forever be associated with the character of Spock in Star Trek, a character which creator Gene Roddenberry described as the conscience of Star Trek. Joe Griffin is with me now to look back on Leonard Nimoy's career. Joe, his career more or less was Spock. He came to it very early on.
He came to it very young. He hadn't had any major roles before that. He'd been in the army and he'd been running his own method acting school at the time in the 60s when he was cast as Spock. So he kind of hit the ground running at a very young age. He was a really popular character from the start, kind of the soul and conscience of the show. He brought a quiet, I think, dignity to the role despite the slightly ridiculous ears that he was made to wear that became his trademark. And he had lovely chemistry, I think, with the rest of the cast.
Yeah, what do you think was a particular quality of the character of Spock, first of all, before we go into how Nimoy managed to bring that out?
I think what's really appealing about the character is that he is an outsider, and Nimoy said that he always liked playing outsiders. He was always drawn to them. Everybody has felt like an outsider at some stage, and as the only alien in a spaceship full of people, full of humans, that would definitely qualify him. And that's carried through into popular culture, like in The Big Bang Theory, characters are obsessed with him because they're intellectual outsiders. And whenever you feel like you're holding back your emotions, you're trying to be polite, you're not, you're right, but you're trying not to raise your voice and be the voice of calm. That reminds people, I think, of Nimoy's interpretation of Spock.
And there's a sort of an inherent contradiction in the character itself, in that this is a character who doesn't express emotions, doesn't have emotions, and yet we attach ourselves, I think, to Leonard Nimoy's portrayal of Spock in very much almost an emotional way.
Yet there's some actors say that the best way to show an emotion is to play somebody trying to hide that emotion. And that's one of the most interesting things of watching him. And it's always the most interesting thing in drama and in literature and in the arts is when people are not saying exactly how they feel or exactly what they think. And it takes an actor of skill to show somebody betraying their thoughts and emotions without literally saying them, and being raised in an environment, in a culture where you're never supposed to say what you feel or you think directly.
All right, let's listen to a clip from one of the Star Trek movies. In fact, this is The Wrath of Khan from 1982, Star Trek II. It was the second of the movies. And this is one where actually Spock gets to emote in an unusual scene.
Don't grieve, Admiral. It is logical. The needs of the many outweigh
the needs of the few.
Or the one. I never took the Kobayashi Maru test until now. What do you think of my solution? Spock. I have been, and always shall be, your friend. Live long and prosper.
It's very moving, actually, to hear him say "live long and prosper" at the end of that scene. Leonard Nimoy as Spock, William Shatner as Captain Kirk in the 1982 movie Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. And Joe Griffin is with us this evening talking about Leonard Nimoy, whose death was announced earlier today. What was that chemistry between those two actors? Because there quite definitely was a very strong sense between the two of them anytime they were in a scene, Shatner and Nimoy.
Shatner, or Kirk, travelled the universe and got to kiss lots of beautiful women, some of whom had green skin, but his only really monogamous, I think, loving relationship was with Spock. They both started off really adversarial, and that's really well drawn in the reboot of a couple of years ago, but they're very complementary characters. While one is rash and arrogant and impulsive, the other one is measured and logical. He's defined by his logic, and calm, and they do lock corns, but there's also mutual respect and affection and even a kind of fraternal love, like a brothers in arms thing that emerges throughout the films. And
was there throughout the television series as well.
Yeah, it's there in the series, but they really had a chance to let it blossom in the films because there was like such a great gap between the films and there was so much space in between the TV show and series that they could just, they didn't have to hold back. They didn't know that they had to make an episode every week of an 80-episode series.
Live long and prosper, the catchphrase that we heard within that. And the other thing that we associate, or certainly I associate with Leonard Nimoy and Spock, is the famous Vulcan, the split finger salute. How did that come about, or what was that? Where did that originate?
Nimoy was Jewish. He was a practicing Jew, and his religious upbringing influenced this. So it's based on the Kohanic blessing. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a manual approximation of the first Hebrew letter in the Hebrew name for God. So he kind of alluded to his heritage the odd time throughout his career.
He also, at a later stage, he directed some of the Star Trek movies. How successful were they and how successful was his direction?
He directed Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, which, as you might guess from the title, he wasn't in front of the camera for that much of. And then Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, which, for my money, is one of the better Star Trek films. This is the one where they travel back to the 80s, and it's kind of a Star Trek adventure, but also a fish-out-of-water comedy when they're in modern-day San Francisco and they have to try and fit in with our strange Earthling ways. He also directed a very non-Star Trek-like film called Three Men and a Baby from the 80s, which was a huge hit. It was a remake of a French film and it spawned a sequel of its own.
If you had to summarise then what the legacy of Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock will be, or what it is, what would you say, Joe Griffin?
I would say that there's a reason that the show is so warmly beloved and there's a reason that so many people connected with Spock, and that is that he brought humanity despite the fact that his character was not entirely human.
Joe Griffin speaking to us about Leonard Nimoy, whose death was announced today. And this evening, Mr. Nimoy's granddaughter, Danny, issued the following statement via his Twitter account. Hi all, as you all know, my grandpa passed away this morning at 8:40 from end-stage chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He was an extraordinary man, husband, grandfather, brother, actor, author, the list goes on, and friend. Thank you for the warm condolences. May you all live long and prosper.